Hello and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. So, conservatives generally have a difficult time understanding most things, like economics and ethics. But today we're going to be looking at how they don't seem to understand movies either. To demonstrate, we have our volunteer, Little Benny Shabibo.
Hi, I'm John Krasinski and I'm hosting SNL with Machine Gun Kelly.
Big week, huge week.
But no pressure though. You better be funny.
Who doesn't love John Krasinski?
Me? I don't like John Krasinski at all. I don't know what it is about the guy, but there's something a bit creepy about him. I get these real sort of date rapey kind of vibes. So me, I don't like John Krasinski at all, no. And his film, The Quiet Place, was terrible. I mean, I like horror movies a lot. Probably my favourite genre, but goddamn, that movie had more holes than a QAnon supporter's brain.
It makes sense. There's lots to love about John Krasinski. People love The Office. Everybody loves Jim. And of course, he made a delightful little at-home news show that went viral during the pandemic. He's the type of dude that seems to resonate with Americans of all types. I think one of the reasons why people like him is because of the not-so-obvious conservative values in some of his movies.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's why people like him. People like him because he's just, like, bland, I guess. Well, he's sort of that sort of funny kind of bland, where he's, like, bland on the surface, but kind of creepy underneath, you know what I mean? But yeah, for the people who can't see the sort of creepiness, he comes across as very sort of generic. He's just got one of those faces that just kind of looks like everyone else. I'm pretty sure that the reason people like him isn't because of what Ben Shapiro thinks are conservative values, because conservative values are deeply unpopular with the public.
Particularly in A Quiet Place. And that got me thinking about some other Hollywood projects that have some kind of sneaky, under-the-radar conservative qualities that happen to be widely celebrated by the left.
Oh, I can't wait, Ben. I absolutely can't wait. Well, the thing is, this is just like, something we've talked about on this channel before, that what the right wing likes to do is take left wing ideas and sort of repackage them as if they're right wing ones. The right wing constantly misunderstand movies. If you haven't got Dave Rubin saying that Thanos was an SJW or some crazy nonsense, you've got Tim Pool saying that Sam Cedar is like Thanos. They've got a weird thing about Thanos. I don't really understand why. Yet Thanos wasn't left-wing at all. In fact, he was fighting a group of people who were led by a guy who's famous for punching Nazis and another guy who's basically based his entire career against fighting the military-industrial complex. So, yeah, that kind of doesn't really hold any water at all. I mean, you have conservatives out there wearing V for Vendetta masks. V for Vendetta, which is a story about Thatcherism, which is pretty far right-wing. That's who the bad guys are in V for Vendetta. Explicitly a right-wing regime. And V is explicitly an anarchist, as in he's a left-winger. So as conservatives are incredibly bad at understanding movies, and the left has pointed that out several times, they just take that talking point and just file the serial numbers off and change it and from whenever we say right wing to them saying left wing. But it's nonsense. It just doesn't hold any water.
Unintentionally. I'm going to show you what I mean with a few really recent movies. The endings of these movies are the parts that best exemplify the values. So I'm just warning it out. These are big spoilers for all of the movies we're about to discuss. If you don't want to know what happens, jump ahead to the next film that you've already seen, or jump all the way ahead to the part where I tell you why so many movies generally are conservative, even though they don't mean to be. Let's start with A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place was released to overwhelmingly positive reviews.
Yeah, not from me though, because it was f***ing terrible. It was terrible. If you haven't seen it, don't go and see it. It really is a massive waste of your time. It's such a shame that Emily Blunt, who's very talented, was sort of wasting her time in this pile of gibberish. I mean, it was terrible, but was it right-wing? I don't really think so. I don't really think it had any degree of depth to it at all. It was just kind of dumb. I suppose dumbness is kind of a right-wing or conservative value, so in that respect, maybe. But let's see what Ben Shapiro's argument is, shall we?
John DeFore from Hollywood Reporter said, quote, "Scenes of what passes for ordinary life let the screenplay focus on mom and dad's attempts to educate their son and daughter while never in the." So now mom and dad have to decide, are they going to have more kids? And they do. They get pregnant. They decide to have the kid, despite the fact that it puts everybody at risk. The entire concept of the film is rooted in the risk that is going to take place in the last third of the film when mom actually has the baby. This is about the idea that even when you have a pretty good reason not to have a kid, you should still have a kid and take life-altering risk in order to have that kid. So unintentionally, the movie's incredibly pro-life.
So, just to summarize, after all that goddamn waffle, basically it's saying that because someone is having a baby in the film is pro-life. That's what it essentially boils down to. Yeah, because his idea is that I guess only conservatives have children. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, there are a lot of left-wing people with left-wing parents. I'm one of them, for example, and my parents certainly did have a baby, which was me. So it kind of seems like this is absolute nonsense. There's a reason why it's called pro-choice, because it's not that like we're mandating everyone must have an abortion. It's that you can choose to have an abortion, or you can also choose to keep a baby. Fancy that. And keeping the baby doesn't make you any more conservative in any sense.
Okay, but that is not the only mainstream Hollywood film that has received all sorts of critical plaudits and is actually pretty conservative. Hey, how about Soul? So Soul just came out. This is the new Jamie Foxx Pixar movie. The film is about a New York jazz pianist named Joe. He suddenly finds himself trapped in a strange land between Earth and the afterlife when he falls down a manhole and apparently dies. In trying to hold back his own death with whatever it takes, he ends up stumbling into the great before in a magical reinterpretation of life beyond Earth. There is a system where unborn souls exist. These unborn souls have value. They've existed well before childbirth. They're given a spark, which is a passion, as the final touch. And then they are placed into human bodies. Life exists both before and after life. And before a child is born, there is life. And before and after people die, there's life. These are extremely religious and conservative concepts.
No, they're not. And I can explain it in very simple terms, in personal terms. I think, in all likelihood, that there is a form of consciousness which exists outside of the need for a human body. I personally don't think that consciousness arises out of the physical structures of the brain. I think that consciousness is first, and then the brain is secondary, or material reality is secondary. You know, lots of people have different opinions on that. I think that, but I'm still very pro-choice. And I don't think anyone has ever managed to describe me realistically as a conservative. So, yeah, absolute bollocks from Ben Shapiro. Again, assigning something that occurs in a film as a conservative value when it clearly isn't one. It certainly can't be considered pro-life. It's neutral at best.
There's no way to watch Soul and go, okay, yeah, and then if you believe that the soul is implanted in the body of the fetus from conception, which presumably is what's happening, that...
Now, you'll notice the word presumably in there. I haven't seen the film, but I'm guessing he's saying presumably because it isn't that isn't the case in the film, would be my guess. That it probably is never specified either way, because they're trying to remain neutral on that subject, which is probably the smart business idea, you know?
If you believe that's what's happening, that you should go ahead and have an abortion.
Well, that's untrue, because, I mean, to a certain extent, I sort of think that that's probably likely what is happening, in a way. I still think you should be free to choose to have an abortion if that's your choice, because it's your body, and you get to choose what you want to do with it. Like, you know, we can't imprison prospective mothers that don't want to be mothers and force them to undergo a pregnancy to its full term. That's just ridiculous. Totally ridiculous.
Arrival. That's another film that received overwhelmingly positive reviews. Mara Reinstein from US Weekly wrote, the sci-fi thriller not only subverts expectations in brilliant ways, it explores deeply felt themes of life, loss, and love.
Now, this is a good film. I have seen this one. Flipping awesome. Probably in my top 10. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth going and checking it out, because it is great.
The box office on Arrival, $200 million at the box office, 8 Academy Award nominations, and 1 win. So the Academy is very much into wokeness, right? The Academy loves the woke. So why exactly did they love this film? Why did so many people love this film on the left? That makes no sense when you actually look at the theme of the film. So for those who missed it, the film follows a linguistics professor named Louise Banks. She works with the military to communicate with alien life forms after mysterious spacecraft appear around the world. With nations on the verge of global war, Banks and her crew are racing against time to find a way to communicate with the extraterrestrials. That because Louise is communicating with the aliens, and the aliens have the capacity to see into the future, Louise knows throughout the process that she is going to have a child and that the child is going to die at an early age. I have not seen a more pro-life message in any movie, because one of the great themes of the pro-choice movement is life is not worth living if you are going to have a kid who is going to have some sort of terrible disease.
No, it isn't. Oh, Jesus Christ, he's wrong about the pro-choice movement, obviously. It's hard to tell whether he's too dumb to understand it or he's willfully misunderstanding it. I'd probably say that it's somewhere in between the two, but he's definitely, specifically, not understanding the film Arrival, which includes some stuff about, her personal relationships and so on, but that certainly isn't the theme of the film. The theme of the film is about diplomacy. It's about reaching a peaceful solution before the military-industrial complex decides to go nuclear and try to put forward a kind of war-based approach to the unknown. Effectively, it's about fear. It's about fear of the other, which is, I would say, fear of the other is a very conservative value. In fact, it's probably the primary conservative value. And this film is essentially spending its almost entire runtime explaining exactly why that value is idiotic and could lead to the deaths of everyone on the planet. It also has a minor theme about a non-zero sum game, which is what the aliens are trying to communicate, that what they are after is a relationship that will benefit both sides of the equation. This is also something that conservatives find incredibly difficult to get their heads around, that they come at things from the perspective of, if we help them, that's detrimenting ourselves, when in fact, most of the time, if you help others, you're in fact helping yourself. For example, they seem to not understand the way that economies scale, so that if you invite immigrants into your country, they don't just extract money from your economy, you've just imported a whole bunch of new customers that you can sell stuff to. This is basic economics, and it's also a basic fact of mathematics, which conservatives can't seem to get their heads around, largely because they're so bound up in fear of the other. This is useful to the people in charge, because if you have the people below you pointing fingers at each other, then they're not going to be pointing their fingers at you. And that is really kind of the heart of the conservative grift. But yes, Arrival is a deeply, deeply unconservative film. It basically refutes everything that Ben Shapiro believes in on every level. And just because it's got a woman deciding to have a baby when she wants to, it doesn't make it pro-life. It would be a pro-life film if she was forced into having that baby against her will and didn't want to. That would make it a pro-life film, but that's not what happened there. In order to view this as a conservative film, you'd basically have to not really be watching it.
Okay, finally, the Florida Project. So the Florida Project is not as openly conservative as some of these other films.
Openly conservative? Jesus, Ben, that is some severe baking going on there. I don't think any of those films even remotely had a conservative message or even any form of conservative value underlying it, whatever.
Now, again, none of the people who made these other films would acknowledge that these films are conservative. They just are.
They wouldn't acknowledge it, Ben, because it's not true. As, you say, oh, they just are. They just aren't. You have provided no evidence whatsoever. So, Hitchens' razor, that which has been provided without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Absolute bunk.
Again, a film with an Academy Award nomination, a Golden Globe nomination, and reviews like this one from Helen O'Hara. Quote, vibrant and brimming with vitality, this is empathic toward its subjects, but fiercely critical of the system that victimizes them. And that's actually not what the movie's about.
Now, I haven't seen the Florida Project either, but here's the thing, I probably would place money on it being about that, because just based on Ben Shapiro's track record of film interpretation, which is woefully juvenile at best, but almost comes from a kind of QAnon conspiracy theory style analysis of finding little bits and trying to tie them together into something that kind of fits your narrative when it clearly doesn't, whilst deliberately ignoring everything that goes against it.
It may be trying to be a critique of capitalism, it misses. It may be trying to be a critique of how we treat the impoverished in our society, it misses. What the film really is about, in the end, is how individual bad choices have ramifications for children.
No, it ain't, Ben. It just means you've misunderstood it. What that is that you've grafted your own bad politics onto someone else's art. It doesn't mean it's about that. It just means that you have confirmation bias amongst every other kind of bias that you have.
There are lots of films that we have not discussed here that have even more openly conservative themes, right? Dark Knight Rises is an obvious one.
Yeah, okay, Dark Knight Rises does have conservative themes. He's correct on that one.
Lord of the Rings films are very conservative.
No.
Death of Stalin is very conservative.
No.
I can't believe that any of the people who made those films are actually openly conservative. They're not. So why do filmmakers in Hollywood keep making films with conservative themes that contradict their actual political ideology?
Well, the secret is they're not. They're not. Why would somebody do something as absurd as he's suggesting? Well, they wouldn't, and they didn't, and it's because this is all absolute nonsense. The reason why is because they're not doing that, but you're just reading into it that they're doing that because you're kind of nuts.
Well, here is the thing. When you look at the structure of story is inherently bent toward conservatism. Why? Because it has to contrast virtue with non-virtue.
No, Ben, that's inherently left-wing. That's specifically what we are doing in both our media and our lives. Because the left are the virtuous ones. You guys are the absolute psychopaths who are literally trying to strip away people's human rights all the time. Trying to transfer money from people who have none into the people's hands who have more. What could be less virtuous than being a right-winger? The people who want to put children in cages just because they've got brown skin. Absolutely unbelievable. The audacity of saying that they're the virtuous ones. It's mind-bending. Absolutely mind-bending.
One of the key elements of the hero's journey is that the hero has to take control of his own life, right? He has a hero's journey, a hero's arc, in which he goes from somebody who doesn't want to be involved to somebody who not only is thrust into involvement, but becomes the active participant in his own story. That person is going to have to overcome obstacles. If the obstacles are overcome for him, he's not the hero.
And this is specifically why, Ben, you don't understand stories, right? The reason that you don't understand stories is because your mind is clouded with bias that stops you from being able to perceive those stories correctly. The hero's story perfectly aligns with the left-wing perspective on the world and the left-wing's role in our society, because the villain is you guys. It's capitalism, it's big business, it's the elites, it's people like you, Ben Shapiro. You are the bad guys. You are the adversity that us, the heroes, must overcome. And being right-wing is to accept your place, is to accept your place as a serf underneath your elite rulers. To be left-wing is to reject that and to try and change the system for something better. It's to be an active participant, to overcome the adversity, or at least face it head on, even if you know that it may be, at least in our lifetime, futile. And you know what we call those sorts of people, Ben? That's right, we call them heroes. And because you've spent your entire life working for the villains, of course you can't understand stories. Of course you can't. You know, this is the difficulty that Ben Shapiro finds himself in. Being on the bad side, the wrong side of every single conflict. Being the bad guy, it means he's lacking representation in film. In a similar way that people in minorities are lacking representation. People like Ben, similarly, is lacking representation. Because when's the last time you watched a film where a snivelling little worm tongue of a excuse for a human being who has sold out everything just and good in this world for just scraping together a bit of cash out of the hands of gullible people, a person who obsequiously bootlicks his superiors? When's the last time you saw someone like that being a hero in something? Well, the answer is never. Because the thing is, just like reality has a left-wing bias, so does story. And people who do horrible, selfish things don't get to be the hero of the story, Ben. They just don't. The real reason why he's trying to present these totally ridiculous claims is it's actually a bit of cope. You see, Ben Shapiro is a failed scriptwriter, and he's written some horrible right-wing novels filled with horrible people doing horrible things. And that's just not what people want to read about, Ben. And he's recently started a film company, and he's really hoping that people are going to tolerate films with a right-wing messaging. But the thing is, they're not, because even right-wingers know that it's wrong. That's the truth. The reason why right-wingers watch V for Vendetta and are still moved is because on some level there is a tiny spark of humanity in them, and that tiny spark recognizes that they are the villains, even if they can't fully grasp what that means outside of the film. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Why not go out and watch some awesome movies? Because you guys are the heroes of them, basically. And I love you all for it. Keep on overcoming that adversity. Mwah.